Hi, I'm Dennis Prager, and it's hard for me to say I hope you enjoyed what you just saw, but I certainly hope it was meaningful to you. I want to take some moments to give some personal reflections on this documentary, on the making of it, on the people in it. You know, I have now seen this documentary about 20 times, and it is amazing to me that each time I still get closer to the characters in this documentary. I don't even remember these people from the brief moments that we met them. But now they are so alive and real to me, and it's just a way of saying to you that this documentary bears repeated watching. I think you will gain even more with subsequent viewings. These people have touched us. They touched me very deeply. I always enjoyed going to Israel. This was my 14th trip to Israel. I have always admired Israelis. But nothing like I feel towards them at this time. Awe is too strong, perhaps, but a respect bordering on awe is an honest reaction to the human being that I met, this Israeli creature, if you will. What these people are enduring as I speak to you now, what they have been enduring, would have driven most sane civilizations to panic, to overreaction, to a paralyzing fear, to essentially a closing of the society, a closing down. Not to mention a bitterness that would have overwhelmed them. And look at these people. We did not choose these people in any way but randomly. Whoever we could find who would talk to a microphone, we talked to. This is not, and I know it's probably the most tempting thing for the viewer to think these people were chosen. That we wanted to give Israelis the best face possible. These are the people that we interviewed. We did not know what they would say. I was shocked, for example, that nobody would say that he hates or she hates Arabs. And yet they weren't doing it to sound good for a foreign audience. I spoke to them in Hebrew. I told them that I sympathize with them. This wasn't like CNN and they were putting on a good face. This was speaking to a fellow Jew who was sympathetic and getting their voices out. And still they just wouldn't say it. And no matter how easy I would make it in the questioning that they hated Arabs. The only one who would, and we kept that in. To frankly maintain the credibility of the documentary, was the mother reporting about her son with the nail in his head. By the way, that boy whom you saw was the one time in the week that I personally did lose my own composure. I sat down and cried in the hospital meeting him. The story is actually more sad than even what you saw and heard. The boy is actually a twin. And so the mother will see how this boy would have been as she watches the twin brother get older and presumably marry, make a family, have a life, and this boy may have none of that, given the brain damage of the nail in his brain. And so she will have a mirror of his tragedy her whole life, as will the brother, as will the boy with the nail in his head, in his way. I talk to you and I have chills as I think about it. And you just multiply this by dozens, by scores, because remember, we get reports of X number of Israelis killed and huge numbers wounded. What does wounded mean? A broken ankle? No, it means things like this very often. Sometimes it is only a broken ankle, of course. But sometimes it's what you saw there too. These are very special people, very civilized people. I look at them, I watch this video, and I think, God, this is a civilized branch of humanity. And when you see Israel's enemies, the celebrations over the deaths of when Israelis have huge demonstrations on these issues, the biggest demonstration in Israeli history was against Israel, because there might have been a secondary involvement, and there was a secondary involvement, a second-hand involvement in the Sabra Shatila massacres in Lebanon. That's when, so I mean, that's when Israelis demonstrate en masse. Is there not a moral gulf? Is there a moral gulf in the world as great as that between Israel and its enemies? It's, to me, a rhetorical question. But it becomes so vivid when you talk to them and you see them. A number of people who have never been to Israel, to whom I showed this documentary before its release, had an interesting reaction. And that is, my God, now I see Israelis as human. That this humanized them for me. Now, I don't know why Israelis need humanizing. Maybe they really do, because the news is just politics and death. And finally, you meet the Israeli who's suffering. They're all suffering. You cannot be an Israeli and not be suffering. You cannot be an Israeli and not know someone who is deeply wounded or actually been murdered. You cannot be an Israeli and not worry about children or your nieces or your nephews or your grandchildren or your cousins or somebody, because they'll go on a bus, or because they'll go into a library, or because they will have a Passover Seder at a hotel, because there are no limits to the possibilities of the death of Jews in Israel. And that's what we have tried to convey here, and I think it does convey it. If I can look outside of myself and I watch this documentary and I see these people, frankly, I'd love to meet them. I do regret that we didn't take their names and addresses and phone numbers. I would love to go and hug every one of them. Tell me you don't fall in love with that young woman at the Ahava cosmetic store. I mean, she just works on your heart when she says, you know, I look and my future is black. And you just want to hug her and say, it won't be so black. And by the way, what struck us was everyone virtually, though she was an exception in that way, was optimistic. Oh, the world will see. Oh, at least half the world will see that we're right. Remember that man, and the taxi driver who's optimistic. And all of them, there'll still be a time where we'll have somebody to talk to, said that lovable man, another person that you want to hug in the mean. This is an extraordinary people. And I don't want to, make believe that there are no bad apples in an entire country. But if these are representative of what Israel has produced, Israel's got a lot of reason for pride in the type of person that it has produced. And I think that's another aspect of this documentary that's very important. It's not just Israel in a time of terror. It's even more so what this person, the Israeli, is like. What has been produced here. When one of the young men said, I'm thinking about it, and by golly, while we were talking about peace and learning about peace songs and getting together with our neighbors, they were learning how to kill us. And matter of fact, it's just the fact. That's correct. That's the genesis of this all. One side was singing peace songs, and one side was learning how to celebrate the death of children on the other. This is not meant to be a political peace. It's not a political peace. We avoided the politics. But you can't honestly avoid confronting what I discussed a moment ago, this moral gulf between Israelis and their enemies. I don't want to get too somber here, but these are somber days, obviously. Most sobering for me personally is that the clarity of good versus evil in this case is not clear to so many in the West. That to me is actually more upsetting and dispiriting than the actual Arab-Israeli conflict itself. there is no, since World War II, there was nothing quite as clear, although I think the Cold War was clear, communism versus democracy, of a moral conflict where black and white was quite as clear. People are confused these days. I hope that this video in some little way helps people, and I hope that you who have seen this will show this to as many people as possible. That's why we made it, after all, to have people see this, to have as many understand what Israelis are going through and how they react, and to see them as we saw them, as an extraordinary people. Where else do you have a woman whose daughter was blown up intentionally at a pizza parlor, who has devoted her life to treating the children of those who blew her child up, as that woman who found it even odd when I asked her, are you going to continue treating Palestinian children? Woman's daughter was slaughtered. It's, I mean, this is heroism of the type, we speak of saints in history, these rare individuals, every generation a few who were made. You got a nation of saints here. Not all, but filled with a large number. And I am proud to be an American. I don't speak it as Israeli. I'm not Israeli. And I never felt this before in all my visits, where I've enjoyed immensely my visits to Israel. But it's under those circumstances that you find the greatness of a people. And I think the Israelis have proved themselves to so be at this time of, I would say, close to unique testing. We speak about the British in during the attacks by the Nazi Luftwaffe over London, and there was heroism. There's no question, and stoicism. This will rank there or above in the history of civilians reacting to evil. That it is not always seen that way in the West is a statement about the West, not a statement about Israel. And finally, to you who has watched this, I believe that every generation is tested. You don't exactly know how, where it's going to come from, but it happens. My parents' generation were tested by Japanese fascism and the Germans and Nazism. And then the Cold War tested the moral makeup of many. Slavery tested in its time, and segregation in its time, and there are always tests. Most people are not bad. Most people don't do much good. It's the way it is in life. You have a chance to do much good. Visit Israel. It's as simple as that. You'll be able to tell your kids, your grandkids, yet to come or already here, that there was a battle for a little country that just wanted to survive. That's all it wanted to do. And after the Holocaust, you weren't prepared to see another one take place, which is what its enemies would like. And so you decided to show up in a place called Israel and just say, hi, you're not alone. I'd like to have dinner at a restaurant. That is one of the great goods in your power to do tomorrow by booking a flight. Was I afraid before I went? A little bit. Of course, all you read about these days is Israel being the target of terror. Once you're there, though, it's just really, frankly, a high. It is a religious high. If you're not religious, it's an emotional high. It's a human high. It's all those highs. To be with good people who are embattled and who haven't let themselves get bad, it's a high. And it's easy to take the easier way out. It is. But that's a choice that we all make with the way we live. My son spent much of the past year there. We were worried. It was the greatest year of his life. He is a better and changed person for his near year in Israel during this time of terror. I'm a better man for going. David and Alan feel similarly. We will never forget this week. With all the horror we uncovered and spoke about, it was actually one of the most enjoyable weeks of our life. A meaningful week, a moving week. Directly following me is a few minutes of a video with a male nurse, a Christian who moved from Germany to Israel to help the Jews of Israel. He's been there a number of years. He speaks Hebrew fluently. To meet good people in life is the best thing you can do. It's the only reason for optimism, in my opinion. And this man gave me optimism. So, once again, thank you so much for viewing. Please get in touch with me if you'd like through my website, DennisPrager.com. Please see this again, and please get copies for anybody, especially anybody who is morally not quite clear on the great moral issue of our time, Israel's fight for survival against those who wish to destroy it.